Joined now by Jeff Patterson, our Canucks reporter, and one half of the Rink-Wide duo with Andrew Wadden. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm having playoff regret, quite frankly. As I see everybody else in all these other markets having fun, it has dawned on me yet again that one of these years, it'll come back to Vancouver. But.
Which is going to bring us to our Bodog poll question. But if you think you got regret now, wait till Saturday down the I-5 here when Seattle rejoins the Stanley Cup playoffs as a host arena. Speaking thereof, do you remember the feeling of the Stanley Cup playoffs in Vancouver, Jeff? I know it's been a long while, but do you remember what this town is like when the Stanley Cup playoffs are going on at Rogers Arena?
I do, and Rogers Arena could rock. I know people always crap on Rogers Arena as the sterile environment, and in the regular season, yeah, but I mean, a lot of that is in reaction to the product that the people are consuming,
and the stakes, the lack thereof.
Completely. So yes, I maintain we just haven't been able to prove the theory, but I maintain that Rogers Arena can be a raucous facility when there is playoff hockey to be played there. So it's been a while. It's funny. I was reminded the last time they played, 2015, they lost to the Flames in Game 1. Last minute goal by Chris Russell, if I recall correctly. And in Game 2 ended with quite a fracas behind one of the nets, everybody involved, to the point that Dan Hamhuis and Derek Dorsett were in a 2-on-1 match with Derek England. And I think what happened, everybody paired off, and all of a sudden Hamhuis was with Derek England, and Derek Dorsett didn't want any part of that to happen to poor Dan Hamhuis. So all of a sudden it was 2 on one of the biggest members of the Calgary Flames defense corps, who certainly knew how to handle himself with the gloves off. So, look, I vaguely recall what the playoffs look and feel like, but damn, it has been way too long.
Great memory on Cowboy Chris Russell, and in Derek England's defense, he was rushing to the defense of 18-year-old Sam Bennett, right? Can take advantage of the teenager in that Stanley Cup playoff series. Jeff, let's move on, and more to discuss from Patrick Halvin's year-end media availability. We haven't really gotten into this over the last couple of days. We have lauded him for Command's performance at the podium. The one place where he wasn't very specific, didn't necessarily signal that he felt all would go swimmingly, was on the Elias Pettersson extension. You know, he talked about it's a process and building trust and how the player himself had a marvelous season, but he didn't necessarily slam his fist on the table and say, yeah, we're going to get Elias Pettersson signed long term. What did you make of how he characterized what's to come here with EP40?
Well, I mean, it takes two sides, so I don't think he can bang the table and say, we're going to get it done. Obviously, the Pettersson camp has some say in that. I thought he was very calculated, as he should have been, to, as you said, pump up the player for all that he accomplished in a 102-point season, his growth, his development, not just as a performer, but, then he also said, but we need to see it in the playoffs. That's sort of where legends are made. And again, he's not wrong there. But Elias Pettersson on his own can't get this team to the playoffs. So that's where Patrick Halvin comes in to, fill out the roster around Pettersson so that this team can qualify for the postseason. Now, he went on to talk about the great relationship that he has, not only with the North American agents, but he's very familiar with the European agents too. And so, these are all signals, I think, that he's trying to suggest that he doesn't see, real roadblocks. I mean, this is going to be a tough negotiation. It's going to be the biggest contract in the history of the Vancouver Canucks. I come at it from the Pettersson side and go back to his comments after his last contract, where he missed training camp, arrived late in the preseason, and got off to a slow start. And at some moment of clarity, he admitted that the whole contract thing, it weighed on him more than he thought it was going to. Well, if that was the case for what turned out to be a bridge deal, and significant money, but not the kind of dollars we're talking about with this one, I really hope that Elias Pettersson takes that to heart and tries to get something done this year to take any of that distraction out of the equation. Now, if he's got a contract for next year, that's not the issue. But if he goes through next year, and at this time, a year from now, they haven't come to any sort of common grounds and have pen on paper, then it presents itself of what's going to happen. Does he withhold his services again? That just doesn't play well. This time, I think the stakes are way higher. Obviously, they're a few years down the road as far as the competitive cycle, and the team really hasn't progressed a ton in that regard. So, a ton of moving parts here. I just think that if Elias Pettersson wants to be completely clear in his mind, he's going to get paid. We know that. It's really a matter of, honing in on a few extra dollars here or there. I would have to think the framework's pretty clear. He's a double-digit million-dollar player for the Vancouver Canucks on this next contract. And so, again, my concern isn't so much for next season because he has a contract in place. But it's if it doesn't go smoothly this offseason, then it opens itself up to some real complications. And I don't think anybody in Vancouver even wants to consider what some of those might be.
The flip side to all this is if they get him on an 8-year deal this summer, on an 8-year extension, and as long as it's not $13 million a year, as long as it's, what we all expect it to be, 10 and a half, maybe 11, I think it ends up being a win, including the bridge contract guys. Like you've got the guy under contract till he's 33 years of age at what will eventually be a completely reasonable cap hit, considering Alex Ovechkin was signing for $10 million 10 years ago. I mean, honestly, the bridge, as long as it goes swimmingly, and that hasn't happened yet. But honestly, they've got to win if they get him on an 8-year deal this summer.
Yeah, I wonder from the Pettersson camp, and Elias seems like a pretty, I say shrewd operator, and I mean that as a compliment. Like, I think he processes all of this stuff. Like, he's not just going to leave it in the hands of his agents. They'll obviously do the negotiating, but I think he feels to me like a guy that's going to be hands-on in the process to some point. I wonder if he wants to create a little bit of flexibility when he looks around the National Hockey League, and he also looks at the state of the Vancouver Canucks. He'll be 24 in the fall, or 25 in the fall. You saw Austin Matthews take a 5-year deal. Like 8 as a max, there's no question he'd make more money than, he could spend in 100 lifetimes. But a 5-year deal will also, if it starts with double digits, will also make him a ridiculously rich guy that would take him to 30, but it wouldn't lock him into the Vancouver Canucks for all of those 8 years if this team continues to spin its wheels and can't find the traction necessary to move this thing in the right direction. So, I think there are a bunch of options that'll be explored. Yes, the hockey club would love to lock him up. It's going to cost them a ton, obviously, but you're right. For the reasons you said, if they can get a star player and get him to sign a max deal, certainly that sets up cost certainty for them for the foreseeable future. I just wonder if Pettersson wants to bake in a little bit of flexibility on his end in case this team doesn't make the strides it's supposed to.
The one thing I'll say, fellas, is that, and hockey's been a little later to this than other sports, the agent will tell you, take the term, take all the money. If you're a player of that stature, you can always request a trade. Now, it may not happen exactly when you want it, but you'll eventually get to your next situation, and you'll eventually get there, of course, with the contract that's going to run. That's going to run the 8 years. The other thing is, if he wants a shorter term deal, like that might be at the cost of a higher average annual value, right?
Yeah,
and that's not doing the Canucks any favors on what is already a cap tight environment for them.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
Yep.
I put it this way. I think the process of the Vancouver Canucks and Canucks Sports and Entertainment proving to Elias Pettersson that they have what it takes to build a perennial contender is still ongoing. I'm not necessarily sure of that file. Yeah. Jeff, on Ethan Bear, it was a kind of an odd answer on Ethan Bear. Yeah. There was kind of a weird joke. At least I think it was a joke there where Amin said, I'm not sure if he's worth a raise or not. And he sort of mentioned that Bear wanted to take a step back from negotiations this in season. Dhaliwal has previously told us, they talked a little bit and then, the player backed off. And when you put that together with what Ethan Bear said on 650 on the weekend about how dysfunctional the team was when he first got here, it almost sounded like, if you're reading between the lines here, like Ethan Bear needed to be convinced to re-sign with the Vancouver Canucks. What did you make of the Alvin answer there, and where do you see this file going?
Well, I have to admit that in real time, because there were so many other topics I think that were higher priority than Ethan Bear when Alvin met the media the other day, that his answer to me kind of flew under the radar. But when I went back and listened to it again, first of all, he said he's got to get in shape, which felt like a little bit of a dart at the player, but he's not the only player. Rick Tocchet has talked about this big summer for everybody. But he also said he has to learn to play the game, which I thought, again, like, does he mean he has to learn to play Rick Tocchet's system and Adam Foote, or is he suggesting that, there are issues with what they saw in the way that he actually plays the game? For the most part, Ethan Bear, I think, was a nice addition to the Vancouver Canucks. I like the player, modern defender, skates well, can, move the puck. His most common defensive partner was Quinn Hughes, so it stands to reason that his underlying numbers, for the most part, were pretty good. When he was paired with OEL, the numbers weren't as good, but some of that was OEL, some of it was shaky goaltending in the middle of the season as well. The thing I don't know about Ethan Bear, he makes $1.8 million. He's got arbitration rights. I don't know that he's got a ton of leverage because he has next to no offense. He had 16 points, 3 goals, and 13 assists for the Canucks. And I just wonder, what are you getting in this player over the long haul? Like, what is his specialty? What does Ethan Bear do well? And I'm not sure that the Canucks can fully answer that question in their own system at this point. Again, he played with Quinn Hughes. You would have thought just by osmosis that there would have been a little bit more offense that would have rubbed off on him, even some secondary assists, get the puck to Hughes and let him do his thing. He doesn't score many goals. That's an issue not just with Ethan Bear, but as you try to build out this Vancouver Canuck defense core, lowest scoring defense in the National Hockey League, if he had this big shot, like if he had a specialty that he could bring to the mix, I'd feel a little bit better about the player, but I don't want to overpay for Ethan Bear. And so I kind of ask myself, how much better is Ethan Bear than a Noah Juleson at their respective price points? And again, you're trying to figure out efficiencies, and you're trying to find guys that can outperform their contracts. 1.8, I'm all right with, but if he gets the raise to 2.5 or something like that,
which is probably where my guess is.
Are you extracting value from Ethan Bear, or are you better to try to cut some corners? Again, Philip Hronek's going to come in and eat up a lot of the minutes on the right side. So, I don't know what the role is for Ethan Bear. I'm mixed on this one. Again, I like the player, the eye test, but we've seen for far too long here overpayments for guys that really don't have that specialty, and I'm not sure what Ethan Bear's specialty is when it comes to helping the Vancouver Canucks.
Just as a point of clarity, I've got him as 2.2 this year. Am I reading that wrong? 2.2.
Right, the Canucks were at 1.8.
Yeah.
Carolina retained a little bit.
On the Carolina retention, right.
Yeah.
So 2.2 is as a rule.
Yeah.
So he's going to 2.5 for sure, if not something with a 3 in it, which gets to AC. I mean, I haven't looked at his underlying stats on zone exits, but it feels like his first pass is there. Like Chris Tanev, and granted he's not defensively like Chris Tanev, but Chris Tanev never got a lot of points, even though we know his first pass was pretty good. It feels like Ethan Bear's first pass is good, but again, we're kind of splicing things. Is that still a $3.5 million skill if that's where they're going to start their ask, right? So, for a right side defenseman, I think you're right. Like, as much as I'm okay with Ethan Bear, is sort of like the backup goaltender. You have to take some risks with a cap-tight team. And is this the risk where you say no to Ethan Bear and yes to a Noel Juleson?
Well, and go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, because of that premium, and we've seen how much difficulty this organization, 2 management groups now, have had finding right shot guys that can legitimately play in the National Hockey League. And I think they've got one with Ethan Bear, but even a Cole McWard, convincing a guy to come out after his sophomore season and taking a risk on a 21-year-old who had played, 2 years of college hockey, like that's how far they were willing to go to try to boost the right side of their defense. So it's sort of bird in the hand here, and the idea of walking away from a guy, again, Ethan Bear can play. Like, I have no issues with that. I'm still, as I've watched him for this season, tried to figure out where does he slot in, because Philip Hronek's going to come in above him on the depth chart. So, is he Quinn Hughes' caddy? He was fine with Quinn Hughes, but I don't know that he's the perfect partner for Quinn Hughes. Well, if he's not, I don't think Hronek's going to play with Hughes an awful lot. I think they're going to try to, explore the depth of the defense. Does that mean Ethan Bear becomes a third pair defenseman? And then, we're talking $2.5-3 million, probably an over. Like, if OEL is going to be the third pair guy on the left, you could be looking at $10 million on your third pair, and that's where they get into trouble.
Well, and guys, it's the hardest commodity to acquire in the National Hockey League, the top 4 right shot defenseman. This guy can at least do a serviceable job of doing that. Now, maybe he's a pretender as a top 4 right side guy long term, but in the near term, they have so many holes. They have very little cap space, and this guy is cost controlled to some degree because of the restricted free agency. I don't see how you're going to go out, do better, and still fix some of the other parts of the team. They've talked about it being a multi-year project. I do wonder.
You just want to get nickel and dimed, right? If you got 6 guys getting $700,000 raises, all of a sudden you got $4 million extra on the cap. They can't be doling this out.
And I hear you there, but come on, are we really going Noah Juleson in a top 4 role next year?
No, not top 4 at all.
No, that's why I'm saying I don't know where Ethan Bear, is Ethan Bear a top 4 guy? I guess is the question. And if he's not, then I don't want to be paying 2.5 to 3 if he slots in over, on a third pair guy. But right now on their depth chart, where does Tyler Myers fit in? Is he going to be around next season? And so that sort of complicates matters. All fixed on the right side is a healthy Philip Hronek's going to play an awful lot. And then it's sort of a battle of, for the remaining minutes on the right side on that Canuck defense.
Well, and I think the priority is getting off of Tyler Myers, which I think further enhances Ethan Bear's value to the club next year, if not necessarily.
If you find a way to get rid of Myers, then the world's your oyster, yes.
Yeah. Jeff, on the coaching change, Alvin had some interesting comments there. First of all, they continue not to own or at least pretend that they don't understand that it wasn't a conventional coaching dismissal. But Alvin was talking about how he felt the energy wasn't great at Rogers Arena, that some of their guys were trending the wrong way, and that there wasn't much trust. I thought there were some revealing comments there about the end of the Bruce Boudreau tenure. And then I love the fact how Taka took umbrage with sort of the new coach bump in meaningless games. There was a little bit of we'll show you next season from the head coach. But to discuss the coaching change and what we learned about it from the two gentlemen on Monday.
Yeah, I thought the Taka answer was interesting, talking about sort of being fueled by the doubters and the haters and creating his own narrative and understanding what people were saying about the 36 games that he coached and the soft schedule and all that kind of stuff. For Patrick Alvin, it was pretty clear that he didn't want to revisit the way things shook down on that weekend of January 21st and 22nd. Said Jim addressed that at his press conference and kind of left it at, the way that it was handled. But then the reasons behind it, and he's said this previously. I'd love, in a moment of clarity, just to be able to ask him sometime. He's used the word safe and safety and players feeling safe.
Yes.
In the environment. And I'm not totally sure what that means. I think it can be taken a bunch of ways, so I don't want to necessarily, apply my own definition of what that would mean in a hockey locker room. I mean, Bruce Boudreau seems like he would be a safe, sort of a guy to be around and have players' backs but Alvin has used that term a couple of times. So, he talked about young players feeling wanted and valued and those types of things. And yet at the same time, I mean, this group's talking about leaning into these 3 guys as their leaders. So, again, there's some mixed messaging going on there, without a doubt, but they made their decision when they did. I think that was in reference to a question about why not tank. The rest of the league was pulling the chute, and you guys decided to change a coach and kind of go for it at that point. And he said that just body language and felt like they were losing some of their players there and those types of things. So they've made their decisions. Now I guess we've seen 36 games under Rick Tocchet and this 4-month stretch that they talk about here in the offseason. And, if there's a positive to missing the playoffs, it's getting the jump on some of these teams that are going to go deep and are going to get worn down. And the Vancouver Canucks are going to have to come back. And the proof will be in the pudding at playoffs, or at training camp, rather. I wouldn't want to be the guy, though, that didn't take warning of what Rick Tocchet has said here about coming to camp in shape. The other thing I found really interesting, guys, is this repeated banging of the drum about coming to Vancouver early and being ready for training camp. Like, do we not recall all of the video that was shot last year at 8 Rinks? Every single day, a new guy joining the group, and there was
Kuzmenko was in August. Like, everybody was here early.
Yeah, so I have to, I want to be clear here that they're trying to create some sort of narrative that guys were showing up on the eve of training camp, and that's just not the case. Lots of guys were here in town and ready to go.
Yeah, that sounds like a comment from 15 years ago in the NHL when off-season routines were really not streamlined. Like, everybody knows the expectation of showing up at training camp these days. That was
and so many so many of these guys are family guys with young kids. They want to get settled and have the kids in school by Labor Day, and they're here, and then they get 3 weeks of skates before training camp begins. So I don't think that was an issue, but maybe Rick talking to people, there were a few that were late to the party, whatever the case. I mean, he's made it abundantly clear what he expects from this group here moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's also part and parcel of turning over the leadership group and room to Elias, Quinn Hughes, and JT Miller. So, yeah. Marvelous stuff, Jeff. Still plenty left on the vine here. We'll get to it more later this week. Thank you.
Sounds good, guys.